So I should probably start by introducing who I am, for those of you who don't know me. So my name is Zane Allyn. I live in the Washington area, so I kind of have been tasked with, the West Veeam user groups, but we're kind of building that out, and as people join in that, it might change. My counterpart here, Joe, is out there in Colorado, so he may be kind of taking that on, but I'll let him introduce himself.
Yo, yo. Can you hear me? Hopefully.
We can.
All right, there we go. Hey, howdy, folks.
Hey,
Gotta love
welcome.
technology. Um, I think this is the fourth different video conferencing platform I've been on for the day, so always fun.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
howdy, y'all. I don't know, the probably three of you that have not run into me before somewhere in the Veeam community. I'm Joe Hughes. I'm based just south of Denver. Similar to Zane, previous Veeamer. We both moved from Veeam to Pure, I think within a couple
Yeah,
of hours of each other, essentially.
yeah, yeah. It's a
But yeah,
few
we're
hours
just
a day, maybe.
longtime supporters of the community. We're still both VMware User Group leaders as well. And yeah, for once, instead of Zane asking me to join something, I decided I wanted to be cool like Zane. I would jump in to try and help out with the Veeam User Group for the West. So
Oh yeah,
that's what
I
we're
didn't
here
think about
for.
that. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, man,
That's
I'm
funny.
trying to be like you. Gotta upgrade from
Yeah,
the $2 words to the $7 words.
$7 words. That's what I'm here for.
Yep. But yeah, honestly, we're just here to try and get things going with the community. We had the thought of doing some of these kind of AMA sessions, and obviously the easiest way for us to start pulling these things off were to do virtual, just because that's easier to kind of get feedback from folks and get things started, and then hopefully we can turn these into more events that happen around all of North America. We've actually got US chapters and Canadian chapters that are interested in kind of taking some of these topics and getting a lot of this stuff going. And really, the intention of all of this is just to get discussions happening amongst people. But it was definitely something that Zane and I, when we talked about it, had seen in the past for um, what was kind of a common occurrence where we would just end up with customers either directly through our engagements and talking to customers or through the forums, or even through other things like Reddit, where people were just saying like, hey, I have some of these common questions, I don't know how to do this, I don't know what these new features are. And as we discussed it a little bit more, there's a lot of changes to the platform every version. There's all sorts of new features. It's really hard for people to keep up with all the new things. And sometimes the changes that affect your environment that's been in place for a long time, it's kind of hard to go back and roll those in. But again, we really just wanted to get these back to like what used to be the fun of all the user groups in person and having actual discussions and conversations with people. So we kind of had the idea to just throw this together.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but when I was a Veeam customer, because I was also that, that was one of my favorite things about Veeam, being able to, and I was in California at the time, but being able to go to the local user groups, which were kind of ran by the SEs back then. It was a lot different, and just talk to somebody about exactly what I'm working on, right? And get ideas and bounce off ideas of the other people there, that were maybe doing something similar or had already fixed that problem or, solved that issue that I was seeing.
Right. Cool. So yeah, if you all have not seen the new community hub, we've got the QR code that's here, or it's just community.veeam.com. This is not the traditional R&D forums that everybody knows and has been aware of for years and years. This is the new community site, so I would say this one is much more active for conversational topics, less significantly less into the deep dive and the technical things, right? That's not really the intention of the thing. So join in, and there's always sorts of events that are going on here, right? Community events. There's different specific themed groups. There's technical how-to articles and discussions that are there, but again, it's way more conversational than, hey, I have this specific bug or an issue that I'm trying to work with, and you're trying to get like PM involved or Veemers to help you with active support issues. And this is where you're going to find out all of the webinars and all of the other stuff that's actually happening within the community itself. So I don't know if you have
Yep.
anything else to add, Zane.
No, we can have a discussion there about, collecting those topics and what people want to
Yep.
see, and we'll try to pay attention to Reddit as well, I think, right? That's what
Yeah.
you've promised, but this is a great
Right.
place to capture all that, and might have been what we gleaned from for this session.
Right. Yeah. If y'all have any questions, throw stuff in the chat. We can answer stuff kind of live as we go through on some of these things. Some of it we're just going through and kind of digging into all sorts of stuff. So if there are more questions or if there's more conversation that y'all want to bring up in the chat, then please let us know. Or if you have additional ideas for discussion topics going forward, whether in person or for another virtual event, then please drop those in as well, because that's always great for us to have more ideas to pull from.
Yep.
Cool. All right, Zane, do you want
I'm
to
looking.
jump in? I don't know if you want to dig into like the what's new stuff first, or if we want to dig into some of the specific questions that we had.
Yeah, we could talk about what's new. I know we had talked about looking at the security and the R stuff, right?
Yeah.
Might
Here,
be
let me pull.
a good start. I think that's kind of a big um, addition to what V12.1 has.
Yeah.
There's several ways now that the Veeam can help you with kind of your security posture, and it's nice to kind of define those. I've had these talks before where it's like, okay,
Right.
where does Yara fit? Where does scanning fit, and all that. So maybe we go down that.
Yeah. So first of all, if anyone either is not aware that there is a new version 12.1, 12.1 is released.
Good
It's out
point.
there. I know for some of us, it's hard to keep up with release candidates versus betas versus what's actually live and everything out there. But 12.1 is released. It is in the wild. Um, I find it amazing and a little bit intimidating that the what's new document is 24 pages for what's new in 12.1.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Even formatting and everything aside, that's like 18 pages worth of content of what's actually in here for features and enhancements that are kind of all over the place. Honestly, just to kind of mention it, yeah, for me, like the major new features, the biggest stuff that's in there is having the malware detection and the scans for cyber threats is awesome. Um, I'm particularly interested in some of the enhancements around Veeam CDP. That's just somewhat me being a nerd and having followed the journey of Veeam CDP for many years through a lot of different iterations. Um,
Yeah, that's
and then
fair.
honestly,
That's fair.
just some of the recovery options for image level backups to me have been kind of cool. What's piqued your interest in 12.1, Zane?
Uh, Direct object in 12, but 12.1 with the V
Yeah.
mover, right? That's something that kind of there, the ability to kind of move your data around into the protection groups, sorry, putting my nomenclature in there, into the backup policies that where they seem fit. That used to be kind of a very manual process back in the day. So I like these little things like that. I'm with you on the security, the inline malware detection, and the way that all ties together with the platform itself. Veeam giving you the dashboards and Veeam One, and tying into what you can do with VRO. Really, really something I'm very interested, or was very excited to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
I was honestly kind of interested in even like seeing what Four Eyes authorization was going to look like seeing the presentation of that at I think the first public presentation was actually at VeeamON. I don't think it had come out before that last year. But yeah, I really kind of wanted to see what the
I think that's
adoption
right.
would be when it got out in the world.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. I mean, backup data is kind of your lifeblood when you do get a ransomware event or have a disaster. So having that extra security on top of it, it's definitely something my career at Veeam was asked for quite a bit. So to see that built upon is very awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always think it's interesting to see what people's thoughts and more so what the business thoughts are around the backup environment. Um, I feel like it's always something that is typically underfunded and does not get enough credit for being as important as it should be to the business. Like number one, it's cheapest insurance policy, but also
Yep.
it's, the fire alarm or the big red button, whatever sort of acronym or nomenclature you want to have for it, of this is the big thing that you go smash when everything else goes sideways, and
Right.
this is
Right.
the thing that actually recovers your business from potentially being dead in the water. And yeah, if it's not running properly, if it's not tested, and if it's not secure, then you're
Or you don't
kind of
have a
just
plan.
waiting for, yeah, or yes, you have no plan.
Yeah.
Well, and
Who
that's funny.
smashes the button and what happens when you smash the button?
Right. Well, and legitimately, it's been funny talking to people. I've used this example way more often than other things, just because it was one of the prime examples that people could see all the downstream effects that had nothing to do with technology, really. Seeing what happened when the Evergreen got stuck in the Suez Canal, and like worldwide shipping got broken, right? And there were ports that were filled up with containers that nobody could get things to the next stage. And everything is great and it's fine when it's all working and it's functional and it's operational, but when things stop and you have to get it restarted from a bad state, or from being completely dead in the water, and you're trying to restart every individual
Yeah.
process and dependency that you have all at once, how do you do that, right? And how do you
Yeah.
know that you actually have a working process for that? And to me, it's one and the same with having part of your data center or your entire data center go dark, right? And how do you recover any of that stuff, and what capabilities do you actually have in the product and your personnel, you know?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, you don't want to think of that during a disaster, right? You want to be able to
Right.
confidently know, well, there's going to be problems during the disaster. You want to eliminate most of those, mitigate all that risk prior to it. Um, but it's funny you talk about backups always kind of secondary, and I wonder if others also feel that and kind of don't get the money, the budget, the talk about upfront from the business. And definitely things you touched on are important. But also, I used to talk to customers about reusing that data, right? So we talked about some of the
Mhm.
security features here, using your backup to kind of inspect things. So maybe that's more on the recovery side where I know that it's going to be clean when I do it, but still using that data reuse kind of for other use cases, before, outside of disasters as well. It's just kind of
Oh yeah.
showing the value of that. And Veeam
I used
platforms
to,
lend itself well to that.
yeah. I rambled endlessly, both as a customer and as a Veeamer, that people never used Veeam to all the capabilities that they could.
Yep.
I mean, legitimately, even just using the copies of your environment to actually do testing on. And I laughed because the only person that ever commented on the way that I said it was actually Anders, who ran all of our. He was the magician
Yeah.
that did all of our in boot stuff at VeeamON and Accelerate and Cisco Live and stuff. And he heard me once when I was just rambling entirely too loudly to the crowd that were there, and he was like, "Dude, you're making them really work for this pair of socks." I was like, "Yes, but they're going to know these are well deserved to listen to me ramble about all the things that they could use Veeam for that they're not doing right now." But I
That
used
you're
to tell
missing.
people, I was like, "You need to test on production and not in production, right? Take your existing data, spin it up in a sandbox, or clone VMs. If you have a secondary site that you can put stuff off to, if you can actually have things up and running in a sandbox using the original IP, so you can test this and inject your own scripts, like all of these things are capabilities that you have. You're paying for the
Yep.
product, you have the resources to do it. There's no reason not to. Like, I don't care if it's testing your Windows and Linux patches before you actually roll them into the environment, just to make sure you can have a true rollback plan for your change approval board or whatever, right? And when somebody asks, you can say, we actually ran it. It took this long for these things to go in, and all the
Yep.
patches to apply. Everything was good after reboot. Here's how long it took for us to roll things back. Like, I had so many times that I no longer had either a CFO or a change manager ever ask me questions, because I could clone parts of my environment and test this stuff to the nth degree to give them the
Yep.
answers that they wanted. And once they knew that we either had those capabilities or that we were intelligent enough to test things ahead of time,
Yep.
they left us alone, right? They knew we were
Yeah.
actually trying to like take care of the business.
You bring that to them up front, right? Before they even ask for it.
Yep.
Yep. So
Yep.
absolutely. And um, I had customers. I did this a bit when I was customer, but pen testing too, right? Why don't you go DDoS your like I like that on production, but not in production.
Yes,
Once
right.
you go, because you know you can do that in test environment all day or on production, you're gonna cause trouble, or you're gonna miss something if it's not the exact environment.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
and
I
now you
still
get,
have that
you know, these
conversation.
addition of Yara rules and things like that. Now you can do a lot more, and actually maybe you can go search for data types
Yeah.
that are of interest to that C level, to those VPs or you know whatever those directors, to make
Mhm.
sure you're under compliance. Absolutely. And again, not
Yeah.
interrupt production.
Right. I mean, number one, I still tell people all the time, even every time, from the pure perspective, when we get brought in to talk to people and data protection comes up, I tell everybody that, backup is going to be essentially the one great equalizer for everything. Like, it's going to test every
Yeah.
funky process that you have that where, like, you don't have proper credentials, or you don't have access, or you have a segregated network or a pipe that's not big enough for what it is you're trying to do. Like, the backup is going to find almost everything inside of there. But if you're not taking advantage of that, and if you're not writing those things down or bringing those things back up as business issues, then it's a miss, right? You being the person that, things have changed quite a bit now, right? Data protection is becoming a lot more at the forefront. But I remember early in my career when backup was the first level you moved to when you came out of help desk. People did not think anything of it other than
Yep.
just, you're the
Yeah.
dude that swaps
I
tapes and we have to deal with you
yeah.
and you're going to be a pain,
I
right? But
joke
you
about that.
can
I
be
was
somebody
always the
that
backup
drives the
admin
business. Yes.
throughout my career because you were always the new guy at some point, right? And
Right.
then, yep,
But yeah, now,
great.
now we have not only a lot of new capabilities and everything on this, but it's the, like, as much as it annoyed me that it was introduced, and it still bothers me that it's called an API. When data integration API came out, where you could literally just take
Can't let it go.
drives from your environment and present them elsewhere, I was like, hey, for all of you folks that have random issues every time there's a Nessus scan going on, or Tenables running things against your environment, or any sorts of scans going on all of your agents, like, before you turn something up, or before you enable a rule set, or when you're trying to figure out how valid one of these things is before you turn it on across your entire environment, why don't you take your critical file servers or database servers or things like that, right? Make a clone of that data, put it accessible directly to your scanning engine, and go try it there first. Or even just, if you need to churn through data and find stuff like that, like, take a clone of that data and mount it to a different server that has that function or that license for whatever product or whatever scan or data churning you've got to do on it, rather than running it against the server that's still trying to, like, host that production IO.
Yep.
And too many people just miss some of those opportunities, right? You got to think outside of the box, and some of that, I guess, for me, is coming out of originally being in, nonprofit and SMB space, where we had to squeeze $3 out of every one we actually had.
I was there, right? Absolutely. Same experience.
Yep. All right. So Zane, one of the things that had come up that we said we wanted to try and talk about was factors for when to go from the local database on the backup server to a separate
Yep.
SQL server, right? Beyond
I think
just
that's a
number of
big
VMs that
topic.
protect, right?
Yep.
So what are your thoughts?
Um, let's see. When I would use to recommend it is obviously size, right? Obviously from a scale perspective. Um, and then I'd also look at, well, I guess it always kind of relates to size because it's the same thing when I build components across different resources, right? Not have it all in one Veeam server. So, I mean, if you're going to build an all one Veeam server, maybe it behooves you to have it there. If you need to keep data a certain amount of time, especially to feed, things like Veeam One, maybe have some separate databases. If you're going to run all those services like Veeam One as well as Veeam, maybe have a separate database. Uh, I don't know. I would be interested in your thoughts on this. I don't think from a protection standpoint, I'd worried about it too much, and maybe you can change my mind on that because Veeam did a really good job of having a config backup. In fact, it's how I migrated all my Veeam servers. I loved it. I
Oh yeah.
have many stories where I lost my Veeam server because, well, you know, I did, and being able to regain that quickly, as well as having warm standby Veeam servers. So I think from a resiliency standpoint, it was never really a factor for me, but it usually was scale or how I was going to build out the components of Veeam.
Right.
I got to a point where I liked my Veeam management server to be virtual. Maybe some of my components were physical, depending on what I was trying to do, storage integration, things like that.
Yeah.
And then, I would kind of kick off the external database. And then you go back to the nonprofit thing or the cost thing. I don't know. Can you afford a SQL license, right? Obviously, that comes into play as well when you're talking about
Right.
costs. But that's
Yeah.
changed, right? Now you have the ability to use a different database type, so that's kind of
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Again, to me, this ends up being one of the things where it's as much, for those of us that have been in the Veeam space even since like early on, but you came in even earlier than me. I think I jumped in it as we were upgrading like 5 to 6. Um, but
Oh, it's with
it
Veeam
was,
itself? Actually,
yeah, with
6 to
Veeam.
6.5. That's when I started my
Okay.
Veeam Derby. Yeah, it was I
But
had backup fail me. The admin working for me said the internet thinks Veeam's cool. I said let's call them, and I was a
yeah,
customer within a month. So anyway,
you know what it is, dude? Like I'm sure it was that you didn't snap the toe straps on it twice and be like, that'll hold. It's yeah. Sorry, bad
that's
dad
right.
joke, y'all. It's yeah.
That jokes,
Um,
yeah.
but no, like things have changed over the years, and even from 12 to 12.1, right? Improvements in the way that they're running Postgres.
Yeah,
Number one, I would say unless you have a license for it, and unless you have a team of legitimate DBAs that are actually managing SQL environments on performance servers, don't
that's
do
fair.
Microsoft SQL anymore. There's no need to do it. And I would still say even only do that if you're going to actually run SQL externally in a database cluster that is
Yep,
properly managed, maintained, backed up separately, and people are actually looking at it for performance. For most people, I'm going to say yes. I default to your Veeam management server should be virtual. If you're running 2 sites or protecting 2 sites, it should absolutely be at your DR site, right? Do not put it on
yep,
your production site
yep.
because you want to be able to
100%.
recover it. But yeah, I mean, like, so even our good buddy Ben just dropped in the chat that with 12.1, they've now even doubled the scalability limit. So we're now up to 10,000 VMs and 1,000 concurrent tasks.
Yeah,
That's phenomenal performance out of an embedded virtual database on
yeah.
a VM for Veeam, right?
That's gonna
If you're
probably
running
hit
into
the
those
scale of most customers.
scalability
Yeah, that's
issues, right? Yeah,
yeah,
then yeah, you have a database team that's probably less of an issue
yeah,
for you to
yeah.
talk about.
Absolutely.
But honestly, it's like just be reasonable about it, and I think we've gotten to the point with the products that as leery as I always was to do it, I would fall back sometimes to we don't have a really good way to go get this data, even with all my crazy hacking .NET PowerShell methods. I can't give you a good way to do this. Let's go scrape it out of the database. I think we're
Yep.
far past those days. So there are still a significant number of people that I know that are concerned with accessing the database to actually go like deep dive through the data itself. And that's part of the reason that they're worried about where to
That's a
put
good
the
point.
database and what to do with it. And to me,
Yeah.
that's gone, right?
Y- Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have a lot more access now. That's a great point. That would have been another
Yeah.
big reason. Yeah. Yeah,
But
I
for
I
anybody,
think
like,
if you're going
we're
to
not
scale
doing a whole
past
lot of,
those numbers, you're probably just going to do multiple Veeam servers too at some point. But
yeah.
um,
I will say, like, do as I say, not as I do, just because this is an entirely new VM lab that I spun up yesterday, just for us to have an environment to go poke around within the demo stuff. But set up your config backups, and especially if you did not do it originally, go double check just to be sure. Do not have your config backups running on your default backup repository, right? Put it out on your new repo that you've created, at least one, because you intentionally did a thing and injected some resources into your backup environment. And then enable your config backup encryption and set a password and
yep,
stash this password somewhere. I don't care if this means you go write it on a post-it note and take it to your CFO and have them put it in a wall safe so you still have it somewhere, but it still needs to be written down for whatever reason, right? Or put it into your shared key vaults that your team has or you as an individual have, or honestly, I was still the guy that I didn't care how many security rules it broke. I still had a USB drive that had like my once a week config backups. It had my file share of like what was everything we need in a DR scenario, and it had my plain text files of like the 3 key passwords I needed to get back into other things to start opening stuff back up. Like
yeah, yeah,
in the end, you're going to get your hands slapped for it, but do what you need to do to protect yourself and the business. One of the biggest things for that is have your config backups. You can restore your entire environment from this very easily and encrypt the backups so that it actually has your passwords embedded in here, because I'm
Yeah.
going to guess that
Yeah.
99% of us, whether it's our production or lab environments, if you're lucky enough to have a separate production environments, because really they're all lab first, your passwords may not be up to date from what you think you have somewhere, and you
No,
probably have not tested those in forever, right?
you haven't used them in 9 months, 12 months, 2 years.
Yeah,
Yep. Absolutely. That's a great, yeah, encrypting gives you that's actually a great tip.
yeah. Steve,
And you can
good point.
you can still do
Sharing
recovery
any,
with Enterprise Manager as well, right? Enterprise Manager lends
yes,
itself to
right,
that password recovery too. It's another method to build in.
yeah. If honestly, for anybody that's out there, if you have not done this yourself, like if you cannot confidently say that you would be willing to be fired because you could legitimately tell somebody exactly where the config backup is and that it's encrypted and has all your passwords in there. If you're not that confident in it, go double check it, right? I would do it once every couple months just to be sure that somebody hadn't screwed with some settings or something anyway. Um, Steve just made a really good point. VRO does not support Postgres. So yes, if you have a
Yeah.
downstream dependency or if you're using VRO, you do still have Microsoft SQL. So just be sure that you're setting it up properly. I've heard tentative roadmap on when that's getting rolled in, but we can't say anything um, has even been made definitive or like a best guess on when it's going to actually happen. So I don't want to share any details and have somebody get upset
Yeah.
about that. But
But it may in the future.
legitimately, just be sure that you are doing this stuff. And if you have not done a restore from a Veeam config backup, or if you've not done a restore from Enterprise Manager, either go into the hands-on labs and try it in an environment, right? Or if you can't go use that for some reason, or really want to actually test to make sure that you know what you're doing, go spin up another VM and reinstall VBR or reinstall Enterprise Manager and go do restores, right? You should absolutely know how to do this and have at least a handful of screenshots, or potentially have a sign off that you're doing this 2, 3, 4 times a year to make sure that your config backup is good and that you actually know what that process is in the
Yeah.
scenario that it ever goes completely down. That's just me. Sorry, stepping off the
Did
soapbox.
did did you ever? That's fair. That's what we're here for. Did you? I used to use it with migrations too. I don't know. I thought it was a great
Oh
tool
yeah,
for that. Instead of having to upgrade the Windows server I'm running on, I just migrate that over. I know back in the day there's some issues with agents if you tied them directly, but that's all, kind of a problem of the past. So
right.
I
Yep.
love the config backup. I have a really dumb story. When I was first new at Veeam, and I just did it myself. Didn't do what you recommended, and my default was obviously the C drive because if everybody doesn't know, if you set up a repo first, or you have another disk first, that Veeam will find the biggest one. I don't know if that was done after or before, but that's something you can do before. Hey, I got a larger drive on here. That'll be your default. And we had a thermal event that I lost my physical Veeam server. That's kind of where I decided to go virtual. And yeah, my
Nice.
config backup was sitting on that. Now that said, and I love to tell the story to customers, obviously the backup data, I had that on a separate SAN at the time. So, as long as I had my data, I could import all of it and do restores. I just had to do the work of setting up backup jobs again.
Right.
So always a way out. Which
Cool.
I don't know if we switch topics here, but I could share a customer. It's just an idea. We talk about one Veeam server at DR site. I do have a customer. In fact, I'm going to go see them tomorrow. Um, they do a really neat thing where they have two Veeam servers, and it's kind of on the vein of what we're talking about from testing. And they've kind of built like an administrative air gap. So because of that portable data file format, or whatever metadata rolls with the backup jobs, they're able to load these into a second Veeam server that doesn't know about the first and do all their testing and the recreating, and it became their DR site. And really the only connection in this case happens to be SAN replication, how we're doing it, but that could be any way that we got the data there. And because Veeam kind of is just very versatile that way, they're able to have this whole separate environment that does the testing nightly, scale, spins it up. They can do additional testing if they need to, the stuff we talked about. And
Yep.
then they have a recovery process that they test very often to restore that into that DR environment. Obviously, they have two sites. It's not equal, but the other one is, it's robust enough to spin up those workloads. But I thought it was kind of a
Yeah.
neat use of Veeam um, with the DR site.
Yeah, I used to love having a secondary site to be able to test things, whether that was like full bring up of the environment or to pull out a portion of the environment um, when say a sandbox wasn't going to be enough, or we needed to have an environment running long enough with enough resources that it didn't make sense to have a sandbox spun up for somebody to try and do 2 weeks worth of testing on something, right? But
Yeah.
rather than rebuild an entire environment, if the most we really had to do was kind of reconfigure IPs and put stuff off on its own isolated VLANs, then we would absolutely leverage Veeam to just replicate the entire environment over and then clone it from there, or just
Yeah.
restore from backup to another site and go through the tweaks on the fly. Because that it gave us another point to test: do we actually know what we need to do if we need to do some weird recovery scenario for somebody, whether that's data recovery or an entire server or an application stack being down, or just it's there as a warm site, or we have some available resources and it made more sense to spend time giving somebody a more recent copy of their production data than rebuilding an entire server environment, reinstalling applications,
Right.
and then telling some
Yeah.
app owner like, here you go, figure out how to get your own data over there and go do it. Right. It was always way better to give them an environment that they were familiar with that was as close of a mirror as possible to production to put it over there. But to your point, honestly, like even to shift it a little bit just for secondary sites, if you all do not have offsite backups somewhere, fix that problem, right? If you have backups that are in the cloud and do not know how to actually restore from those, even if it's just provision a new VBR environment, run it with a community edition license to just get the thing stood up and going, and then
Yep.
connect it to your cloud backups to know how to let it rescan those repositories and find everything. That is something you're going to want to know how to do, and potentially we have the documentation for it online, but you're way more familiar with it if you've done it once, even if that's outdated information for the next time you have to do it. You
Yep.
don't want to seem you don't want to be completely unpracticed at this and scrambling when it is a down situation, right? Don't ever put yourself in that spot of not trying something when things are working and trying to figure it out when things are broken.
That'd be a great demo. Like
We
Shane
can
thinks
we
that'd
can
be a
definitely
great
have that.
demo.
Yeah.
Sure. Just spinning up a second site. Yeah.
Okay. So Rochelle just threw one in for
Oh,
offsite
wasabi.
backups. Recommendation for a small organization, right? Wasabi and any pros or cons for using Wasabi. To me,
It's
I
cheaper.
I like Wasabi, right? It's cheap, it's highly available. The only
It's
thing I
pretty
would
performant
recommend
too for being
is,
a
yeah,
object store. Yeah. Offsite. Yeah.
it really is. I would just recommend you go double check what you have for the two biggest things that are going to kind of pain you are the amount of bandwidth, like what's your pipe for upload, and what's your
Yeah.
window for actually getting that data off site. You want to make sure that you go through and test and see how that's going to actually scale for you, and then the scale of what it is that you have on site, because at a certain size, like I'm not trying to like say anything negative about Wasabi, but there have been some performance issues that some customers have had when they're either trying to do mass upload of data or mass changes and bulk deletes of things, where
Yeah.
just I mean a lot of this is just the core of object storage and how it works, that this is not you going and immediately deleting blocks off of disk the way that you do with block storage. It's calling an API that has um, basically wait times, right? Timers for it to go through and do its thing when it hits whatever cleanup it's supposed to do on the back end, depending on how that object storage
So
S3 platform is built.
it's a shared
So
environment too, right? To some degree.
right,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say no huge cons against Wasabi, as long as you're not at a scale that you're trying to do massive uploads or deletes of environments all the time, that's where you're potentially going to run into some issues. But yeah, for smaller environments, it's easily consumable, easily accessible. So and
it does. I'm sorry.
it's
I was
better
just
than
saying,
nothing,
it
right?
does
That's
hit a specific need though, right? Because it's not,
yes,
you can't recover there. So you
right,
are going to have to bring that data back. So it should be, in my mind, I lost everything and I need to be able to rebuild,
yes,
not my maybe necessarily DR plan. I should have something else kind of hopefully in place, or at least something reasonable. But having copy data offsite is imperative. Yeah, absolutely.
yes,
And that's a kind of a great direct way to do it. But you are going to
yeah,
have that SLA, that recovery time. When I got to pull that data down, how long can I be down in a
right,
real DR event? Yeah.
yeah. To me,
I,
it's absolutely more so smoking crater. I'm going to go from I have
yeah.
nothing to I can recover my backups that are there and start getting my environment back up. It's not what I would use for regular recovery or even recovery of something from a month ago,
Yeah.
probably, right?
It's going
I
to
would
take a little
try
bit.
and hit
Yeah.
all of those requirements for what we have on site.
I I used
So
to, we didn't have a Wasabi back then, but I helped manage an environment where I knew if Smoking Craters in California too opens up the ground, we weren't needed to be opening for business. It was a nonprofit, but
right,
someday somebody's going to want to rebuild that organization. And at that point, I used to send data off to the cloud, but it was the stuff I could rebuild the organization from, the donor database, the financials. So exactly that Smoking Crater idea. Otherwise, I had a site across town that was my, hey, something happens in this building, I can stand up over there. And
yeah.
luckily we own both, but yeah. So it's also a specific need and it does a very good job of it.
All right. So I'm gonna say like just from number one we got 20 minutes left, so we want to try and hit the last two topics we talked about at least.
Yep,
But
let's do it.
let's go ahead and dig into Yara a little bit. I know this is one that's been asked by a lot of folks. Um,
Yeah, I'd be
First of all,
interested if everybody's kind of understands Yara. I mean, you can put comments in the chat, or knows what it's used for, but
yeah, feel free
we'll
to
walk through it
drop
now.
in. Yeah, I guess you know what. Let's go back and do kind of like an overview on Yara, right? So
Like,
if anybody has not looked at just the core of Yara, not necessarily what it is inside of Veeam, this is a tool really that was meant to make it easier for researchers to identify and classify malware samples, right? If you look at it here, not that you need to be a developer, right? But looking at the code of what this is for a rule, we have some metadata about what this thing is and how we're going to identify and classify it. Then we have some strings that are in here, and then we have conditions that says like it essentially this rule validates that this thing is bad, right? If it hits these conditions, right? In this instance, it's if I see any of these strings of data, then this rule says I found this thing that I'm looking for, right? That's essentially all that it is string matches, right? Whether it's strings or booleans in SORM's expression to look at the logic for text and binary patterns, right? Um, the magic of what it is inside of Veeam is just the fact that they've actually wrapped it up and given you like a tool that can actually do this, right? So you're not just doing string matches on your own against your data, and it's that would not be something that would scale for you. But if nobody's
and
actually seen this inside of Veeam,
and
it's
Shane
here in
pointed out
malware
there's
detection.
great script library on the hub, or on the community hub.
Correct.
So
Yeah,
good place to
that's
go get
I will
started with
cover
those.
that. Yeah.
Yep.
Because that's where these samples that we have that I'll jump into in a second actually come from a post that Rick has on the community for the top 10 YAR rules. These samples were actually ones that came up because these were the things that Veeam support was seeing most often, and to try and make this uh, a lot of people are never going to go look at and adopt a new feature if they have to go figure it out entirely on their own. But if you can give them some samples and show them how to do it once, kind of like we're trying to do here, it's much more likely that somebody's going to go through and find it, right? So for a lot of this is like this one's particularly hunting for binaries that attack Active Directory from Linux, right? That somebody wrote. Here's a more complicated one that somebody put together that's actually got details from Malpedia for specific references for looking for things, right? And part of the point of all this as well is that you don't even necessarily have to write all of these rules yourselves. There are great resources that are out there for this, but this is what these are, right? These rules are just putting together, this is specifically what I'm looking for. Like in these sequences, it's specific hash values, it's specific scores that you want to give it for when these things are encountered in an environment. Or in the simple example we were showing on the web page for the Yara docs, it's string matches, right? Different options that you have for what it is you're actually trying to do inside of your environment. But to make this easily feasible inside of here, first of all, I have one of these Yara rules that I've already gone ahead and actually put into the environment. I'm going to put the other ones in here. And if you go look at Rick's post that he has inside of the Veeam community, this is the same exact thing that we're doing here. He just has it recorded in a YouTube video. But I have these files sitting in my documents right here, right? So under documents, I've got all my Yara files here. Inside of the VBR console, I'm just going into my file view. I've expanded out to where these exist on the C drive, right? Program files, Veeam, backup and replication, backup, Yara rules. If you'd even just search the drive that you have Veeam installed on, you're going to find a folder that says Yara rules. And what I'm going to do is actually just copy over from my documents all these sample Yara rules. Okay, highlight them all, copy, and paste. And again, if you had no idea, you can actually copy and paste files or move things around from inside of Veeam. You need to go discover the console a little bit more.
Yeah,
Right?
it's been there forever. Yeah.
There's all sorts of stuff you can do. I mean, honestly, this was something that somebody had shown me, for working on stuff. Like I knew the file view was here. I had not realized they had given you the ability to like copy and paste stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I had used it so many years ago.
I used to use the file copy feature to take my config file and make a third copy or a second copy of it. Yeah.
But yeah, so now we have these new Yara files. The three that are in here by default are this find file by file hash, find file by parameters, and find string. Those are the ones that come with a brand new clean Veeam install. The other 10 we pulled out of that community repo. But to actually go run these things, you open up your menu on VBR, you go to malware detection, and then what it is that we're going to try and do here is for the incident API, this gives you the ability to run quick backups on any of these things when you run this stuff. When you have anything that's detected inside of there that you need to be able to kick off from an external XDR EDR system, right, tying into incident API. And then for the actual Yara rules themselves, for most people, you're going to want to actually do scans a little bit differently, right? So overall for malware detection, this should be on by default, but if somebody has messed around with it, make sure that you have these malware definitions automatically updated inside of here. But ideally, what we're going to want to do is go kind of run an on-demand scan. Let me get back to my main menu here. Let's get to my backups. We're going to go to disks. Let's go to, say, my Win jump box. So inside of any of these backups, you're just going to right-click a backup. You're going to hit Scan Backup, and then you get a couple of different options for the scan mode, right? And this really depends on, are you just trying to run like an interactive scan? Are you trying to find specifically a clean restore point for something? Are you trying to find a restore point that's within a specific date range? This really comes down to, are you trying to test to see if you find something, or do you already know something is bad, or are you in a really like, ooh, this is a terrible, I've got to recover something as quick as possible sort of scenario? For this instance, really what we're trying to do here is just like walk everybody through, like, here's how you test Yara for the first time.
Yeah. And as we say, this dialog box here is doing a few things, right? And you get a choice, right? Looking for a clean restore point based on that malware detection, actually using an AV engine or Yara, like you're going to show here. So you can do kind of a few of the, or you can pick which one of the scans you want to do. Or combine them.
Yeah, and I mean you have the ability to even go run to scan a restore with the with an AV engine and with a Yara rule, like with the same scan, right? You can have it do both of those steps concurrently. These are not either or, right? But so for this instance, I'm just going to take a Windows jump box that I've got inside of the environment, and I'm going to say I want to try and go check it against Lockbit, right? And tell it which range that I've got inside of here. So for this one, I'm going to go from most recent restore point to oldest restore point. And then you have the ability of, as soon as you have detected one of these things, you can have it stop the scan and just give you those results, or you can have it continue scanning all the remaining files so it catches all occurrences of where this Yara rule matches to files that you have inside of your backup. So it really, are you just trying to detect that it exists, or are you trying to find every occurrence that's of this? So I'll
Yeah.
go ahead and let it detect just the first instance, and we're just going to go ahead and kick it off to just like watch. Um, but Zane, what are your thoughts on customers using Yara for scanning their environments?
Well, and I was going to, bring this topic up to you. You can use this for more than just malware detection, right? I think it has a lot of strength in, again, data reuse. Now I can go find string matches for PCI compliance, for instance, or
Right.
other type of data. And there's kind of a comment in the chat or comments or the chat, sorry. What do I do after I detect something? Really, this is to go identify where that data is. So now I can kind
Right.
of look into the backups, go find that data, and then you're going to take steps probably outside
Yeah.
of Veeam for sure. Or if
Right.
it's malware, you're going to use Veeam to restore. You're going to find a last clean restore point. If it's something like PCI compliance, I just think it'd be a very powerful tool to kind of again bring backup to the forefront as a Veeam as a useful tool for more than just hey, I lost a file, I need to restore it. So I think it's
Yeah.
a powerful thing, and it's worth, again, a lot of scripts out there. You can get started really easily and kind of start to play around with this.
Yeah, while this is going, since it's just the scan, there's not really anything hugely interesting to check out there. It's just going to show us that it's going through here. But you're going to want to make sure that you've looked at the Yara documentation to again get a better view of what it is, and really this has the deep dive on what you can do with Yara rules. So like I mentioned before, you have the capability using the data integration API of essentially doing like an iSCSI mount of a disk to another system. So if you have a separate scanning tool, you can use that for specific needs. If you're just
Yeah,
trying to figure out if you have things within your data, like if you want to put together a regex match to find if you have a system that's not secured properly that has credit card information and breaks your PCI compliance, right?
yeah,
That is something that is a very useful thing that's very impactful to your business that you can put into a Yara file and have Veeam go look at that for your environment
yeah.
against your actual data that's there, right?
Or
There's
or make a
also
report that says you don't have that data, right? And you can say, hey, we
right.
done the scan. This
You
is how we
can
did the
you can
match.
actually,
Because I
yes,
used to have to
validate
sign
that
that
thing.
PCI report every year. So, you could actually
Yeah.
say, yep, I know it's not there.
Let
Yep.
me why is my
Yeah, I think that's kind of a really big place where it can help because
hold on.
there's
Dark
a lot
view's a
of
little too dark on that one.
whereas
Uh,
your malware, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but your malware in line is going to find active maybe places. Yara could help you with maybe finding files that are related that maybe haven't done anything yet or that are sitting there in your file environment. But
right.
that PCI compliance could really be helpful for, and I just say PCI. This can be any type of data, but that's just a good example of
Yeah.
environments where I have to scan, I have to sign a thing that says that this isn't a problem in my environment. I know that we're not vulnerable, and here's the steps I took to prove that.
Yeah. So if you're totally new to Yara, at this point, I'm going to say if you're totally new to almost any subject, go jump on GitHub and go search awesome space or awesome dash whatever it is you're looking for. So Yara, like Yara is one of two acronyms, whichever one you find more amusing and decide to go with, right? It's either yet another recursive algorithm or it's yet another ridiculous algorithm. But again, this is
Like,
all pattern matching. The cool thing about this repo that's up here for it for Yara rules is this actually has different tools that has different rules. It's got services. It's got different syntax highlighters you can do to like play with it and come up with your own better Yara rules. All these things are out here and all of these are available resources for you to just go, like anybody that wants to can go download all of these Yara rule files and just slap them in your environment and go see what you have, right? Just be aware that you are going to be consuming resources on your Veeam environment while you're doing these
absolutely.
scans against your backup information. This would be another instance where may not be bad to have another platform or be able to go um, test off of, let's say if you have storage snapshots inside of your environment, you can scan off of those backups, and
Yeah.
it's a little bit less intensive than running against your backups inside of your VBR server. Lots of sorts of
Yeah,
things that you can do or play with sandboxes and whatever.
load
I'm
another
gonna
Veeam
go ahead and
server, right,
close
and
this out, but
let it scan.
again,
Yeah,
not super difficult, right? There's a specific folder that's on your Veeam server to drop those URL rules in. Start out thinking of it as string and pattern matching. Think of where you can go from there for things you can look for inside of your backup data. I've even started testing this for doing some string matching on things that are within script files that I have or log files that I have to go back through and look for things inside of the environment. And again, just put yourself in the mindset of thinking of Veeam as a tool that has some great options and capabilities and sorts of things that are inside of here to help you do more with the data that's already in your environment, right? You're working
yeah,
against your production data. It's not live, right? So you're not impacting the production servers to do this, but you have a clone of your data from however your most recent restore point is old to go look at it and figure out what sorts of things you have. Honestly, to the question about what else to do after malware is detected, I'm going to say the next things that you're going to want to do with this, and this is another capability of Yara that some people may not necessarily understand is there too. You have the option of going and doing a restore of your entire VM, and you can go do a staged or a secure restore. And even when you do these, you can still have it bring this up and run Yara when you're doing the secure restore of an environment. So for
okay.
this one, I'm going to do a restore of an entire VM. I'm just going to do staged restore. I'm just going to quickly walk through just renaming this thing to just show what the process is for this. I'm going to rename this to demo. Come on. Okay. Restore tags. So once I get to this point of doing my secure restore, then I have the option as well for scanning the restore point with an antivirus engine or scanning it with a Yara rule, right? And then it gives you options of if the malware is found, do you want to proceed with the recovery and disable the network adapters? Do you want to abort the recovery? And also that same option we had from earlier of do you want to continue scanning all remaining files or do you want it to stop once it hits the first occurrence of these? If you think you have malware in your environment or you're trying to do a recovery to give yourself a clean sandbox where you can go dig in further, I'm going to tell you, you only need to find the first occurrence of one of these because you're either at that point trying to determine is it a false positive or just assume that it's bad and you need to get into the environment sooner than later to try and figure out what it is.
Yep.
Um, the reporting on
Good
all the
point.
instances is great, but honestly, like get the thing up in a protected manner with no network connection and then get into that box and do more with it. Right.
Yeah.
So if your Yara scan finds something or if your malware detection finds something, my first step would be secure restore, have it run the Yara rules to tell you what it is that it's finding, and then give you a test box that's somewhere that you can actually do things with. And then Zane, I know we're running short on time, but I figure like since this was an ask from Rickertron, we should at least have the short discussion on how a user schedules their backup jobs.
Okay. What are your so like how to do it or the maybe more the thinking
I mean,
behind it?
his question was more the yeah, Wakas. Let's here. I'll tell you what. Let me find the link to Rick's thing real quick and drop that in here. I wanted to make sure I kept
Just
this.
fix something here.
Yeah, Rick's video on how to install a Yara rule with Veeam. I'm dropping in the chat, so if y'all need to go find that on the community, you can find it and get to his YouTube video on
Yeah.
it. But I think Rick's asks was a lot of the end-to-end logic of the business in the Veeam config, and so to me, it's less so the backup window. It's more so like everything else that goes into your backups that the backup admin may not be aware of. That's just me, but give me your thoughts.
Well, so if we're just going to talk about scheduling backups, I had this conversation recently, so hopefully I'm hitting what you're asking. I think this is a great place for the backup admin, or at least the IT admin and the business to align, because they're going to say they want everything all the time, but there's obviously a cost to that, and so in being able to kind of get to a point where you can classify your data to understand, SLAs that you might not need to meet, retention needs, all these things. For instance, the environment that I managed before I kind of stopped being in the IT ops world, I may have had backups that I ran multiple times a day, but it wasn't for everything. I had stuff that I only needed to keep a week because I wasn't going to go back beyond that unless I sent it offsite. So kind of just getting to a classification of that data. And I think we've had a conversation recently. Maybe there's stuff you never want to, back
Right.
up, right? But getting the business to, hey, these are the policies I'm going to set, and of course, I'm going to advocate for using tagging where you can, right? Kind
Right.
of automate
Yep.
this at the end,
Oh yeah.
simplifying your management to those constructs of how often I need to take a backup. What are my RPO, what are my RTO and RPO objectives, classifying data by that, and then setting that policy, getting those policies, excuse me, and getting the business to kind of sign off on it, and then tagging things appropriately.
Yeah.
And then the one that you don't bag up, make sure somebody signs that twice.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so
Tony,
some around that is kind of how we want to think about it.
right. I just want to mention real quick. I don't know if people are going to be dropping because we're at the time mark. Tony, I see your question there. That was a little bit deeper of a conversation. I would say if you want to find me and Zane on the community site or just post it up on the community site, there's a bunch of us that can help you with that. I used to be the PowerShell scripting guy for all things Veeam a couple years ago, and I still do occasionally. So we're glad to help
Yeah,
you with trying
in
to
his spare time.
consolidate your environments or use this as another use case of like, here's how you go spin up a third Veeam server. Like as long as you're not backing up more workloads than what you're licensed for, Veeam does not care how many VBR servers you install in your environment, right? Go
Yep.
nuts, play with your config backups, figure out how to merge stuff together and all that. Back to the specifics on the like scheduling the backup jobs though. Yeah, I always tried to tell people the way that I ran my environments was all of my templates, because I had everything provisioned from template for my virtual environments, had some sort of a CYA tag. Like this will get a once a week backup just because I don't know what it is, right? Um, when people told me that they do not need a backup, I would always explicitly say, cool, sign this paper that says you acknowledge I will never be able to recover your data, because then
Yep.
I'm going to tag your VM as do not backup, and this is explicitly excluded from every backup job I have in my environment. And
Yep.
people would be like, ooh, maybe not. Maybe that once a week, that's okay, right?
I like once a
That's
week. Yeah,
fine. If
exactly.
you can save your resources from doing CYA backups just because you have no idea what it is, and if somebody has to define better what their thing is, that's great. That's good for your environment. To me, scheduling the backups is less about resources the way that it used to be in the old days of like we would consume the network, we would consume all the storage, we would consume all the virtual resources and the proxies. Most people have way more resources inside their environment to deal with the backups now. It needs to be more around what is the recovery, right? And what do you want that experience to be for you and for users that need to get that data back? Number one, are you okay with just VM level backups? Number two, do you need application level backups? And your backups are, they might still be somewhat as resource intensive, but they are significantly smaller if you do them more often. Imagine that, right? Especially if you're doing virtual environments and you're doing change block tracking. But also just think about, even if there is a little bit of pain or if there's a little bit of performance hit that your customers are going to take inside of your environment, is it more painful for them to deal with 5 to 10% less performance for a certain period of the day that's lighter versus them potentially losing 12 hours worth of data that you can't recover, right? If it's really that critical, then you can make a case for getting more resources inside of your environment or everybody having a little bit of shared pain to make sure that you don't have the worst pain of not being able to recover that data either when somebody needs it or to the point that they actually need it for point in time recovery, or that it takes you so long to restore that data that it's kind of unfeasible for anybody to really do anything with your backups. um, so yeah, I feel like the conversation's shifted quite a bit from what it used to be. You're muted, Zane, or your headphone went offline. Nada. I feel like we need the camera view for the next time we're going to do this, because the looks from both of our faces, I'm sure, are, entertainment that the audience is missing. All right. If anybody has any last questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We will start up another thread on the community site to make sure we keep these things going. Especially if we did not address one of your questions, then yeah, please ping one of us so that we can try and jump on this stuff and keep these conversations going. Zane, try it again. See if your audio's back. Nope, nada. Gotta love the audio issues. And just to mention, it was one of the asked topics, but we wanted to make sure that this was probably something we could dig into way more in demos. But there's been a huge conversation around Linux, right? What can Veeam do on Linux? What components can we have on there? I still get a ton of people that ask me all the time, like, "Hey, when is VBR on Linux coming?" And I'm like, that's I still joke and tell everybody like V14 because I feel like that's far enough out that I can just tell them like, come back later. Zane, I don't know if your audio is back. You can try it again. Still no mic. All right. Well, Zane audio's out, so I see that we got people dropping out of the attendees right now, so I think we'll go ahead and call this one and get the recording up. But again, if y'all have more questions, if you have more suggestions, if you want to see a different format for these things, or ideally, if you want to find out, what your local Veeam user group is, so you can actually go attend an in-person session, and we can have much more, interactive live demos, or I can, do the session via interpretive dance as I always threaten to, then let us know. So, all right, y'all. We'll go ahead and close it out. Sophia is working on videos to get those up at some point soon, and let us know what you all would like to see next.